This is the new Sony FS5. Now this is my first look at it, and it's a real good example of when you read specs online and when you look at pictures online, sometimes it doesn't give you a good idea as to what you're dealing with. I didn't imagine it would be this small and this light to hold in your hands. And the wonderful thing is, it can actually be made a lot smaller. You can take off the handle, you can take off the side grip, obviously take off the lens. So if you want to pack this in a bag, you've got a really small camera to pack away, which is great for when you're traveling and if you want to travel with multiple cameras. I'm with Tom Crocker. Tom knows all about the camera and he's going to give us a good run through. Tom, tell us about the camera.
Sure thing. So, as you can see, this is a very little camera. It might remind you a little bit of the FS7. It's a fantastic follow-up for that. We were able to launch that last year here at IBC. This year, the FS5. Now, a lot of the same design type elements, but in a much smaller form factor. Now, we've got similar sensor, Super 35, like we did in the other one. It does 4K, it does HD, it can go very fast. Of course, we can do 50p, 60p internally. That's pretty standard for this type of camera these days. But it's also got a burst cache in it, which will allow us to do up to 240p of acquisition for up to 7 seconds. So some very impressive statistics there. We've also got a new ND filter system in here. So of course, built-in ND, that's exactly what you want for this type of run and gun documentary, take it anywhere, pick it up and go camera. But it's actually variable as well. We've got some special filters, which means you can choose any level, aside from various presets, but any level you like, up to 1/128th. Going on from that, of course, looking at the shape of it, we've got this handle on top here. Now we can remove that if we want. The body weight alone is only 800 grams, so it's an incredibly light camera to have so much power in it. We can take that off, build it down for hanging off a drone or something like that. Now, another one of the cues that we've taken from the FS7 was, of course, the handle. The FS7 is known for its distinctive arm that comes down the side. And again, while we haven't gone for an extended arm here, although I'm sure there'll be a number of third parties doing a number of different bolt-ons and attachments coming up for this camera, we've still got this great control arm. So one of the things that people have really enjoyed, and of course one of the challenges shooting 35mm is keeping everything in focus. You've got a much shallower depth of field. So being able to leave your left arm free, and you'll notice I'm holding it with really no trouble with just one hand, is being able to maintain your left hand on this wheel here, keeping everything in focus. So this control arm here, we can rotate in any number of positions. We can take the whole thing off fairly easily. So you've got all of your control, various assignable buttons, one there, zoom rocker, the release for rotation, an iris wheel. We've even got another assignable in there under your fingers. So you can really spend the whole day holding it just like this, controlling everything with your right hand, keeping left hand for focusing. So that's very, very nice. Going on with the sort of flexibility of the body design, we've got the viewfinder mounted here that rotates in all manner of different directions, but you'll notice we've got a number of screw holes. One, we've got them here, there, and down there. So you can take the viewfinder, you can put it down there, depending on how it's rigged, where you've got it on the end of a boom or something, got it in a gimbal. A huge amount of flexibility.
I got to ask you, I know it's 4K, I know it's HD, I know it's 10-bit 422 with HD. When you're recording the 4K, it's 100 megabits a second. Is that 420?
It is 420.
Okay. In your opinion, because I know you've been involved in some of the higher end cameras as well, where does 100 megabits 4K at 420 fit in? And what's the benefits and what's the limitations?
One of the really big challenges with 4K, because whenever we do a technical evolution, certain things are required. Now, that might be processing power or it might be storage. So there's always a trade-off to be made there. Now, to make 4K accessible, of course, people have been shooting 420 in the HD world and the SD world for years and years and years. It's not terrible. And we provide options for 422 in some of the bigger cameras. But in order to make 4K accessible for people, 100 megabits is a great looking picture. XAVC is a substantial evolution in terms of the algorithms behind it, in terms of how we've implemented level 5.2, which is a very top specification of H.264. So it's a picture that needs looking at before people decide that 420 isn't enough for them. For the type of people who we think will be using this camera a lot, for the people who might be making their first steps into 4K, it's not necessarily a cinema camera. Now you can do some very impressive things with this and it'll be a great companion to the FS7. Of course we've also got S-Log and things like that in here, so in terms of getting all of the 14 stops of dynamic range off this and into a file, there's a huge amount of flexibility there. So it's a great codec, but it's manageable. If you look at the 422 intra-frame type implementations, you're then moving up to sort of 600, 700, 800 megabits, and that isn't for everybody. And again, of course, making sure that we have a sensible solution for working with the media. Of course, in this we're using SDXC cards. Those simply can't write that fast. So if we do a very reasonably priced camcorder, you don't then want to be spending huge amounts on media. It's about talking to the market who require it.
One comment I'll make is Sony have always been very good at making cameras which produce content that's ideal for fast turnaround. And you said it already about the size of the files. 100 megabits a second at 4K is going to give us something very workable for our nonlinear editors, for storage on hard drive without taking up so much ridiculous amounts of space that it's impractical. And it might be nice to get the better quality on a F5 or even an FS7 shooting at 600 megabits a second, but really it's not practical. And I think all I've done is say what you already just articulated. But from my point of view, that sort of thing matters.
Absolutely, I think that's right. And of course, I wouldn't like to not mention that the HD codecs in here, you've got XAVC long again, you're then getting, in the HD world, 10-bit 422 at very reasonable bit rates. 35, 50 megabits. 50 megabits at 50p, 10-bit 422. That's some really impressive coding. If you're looking, a few years ago we were using MPEG-2, a lot of people still are, but that's 50 megabits 422 8-bit at 25p. So we've managed to fit twice as many frames in and make it 10-bit for the same bit rate. So it's a really significant evolution.
And a comment on 420 versus 422. I've done so much 420 in my time. The F3, which I know very well, I have several F3s which I still use now, obviously a few years old at this stage. Internal, that was 8-bit 420. External, you can go all the way to 444. I would say 98% of what I've ever done on that camera has been 420. Perfectly suitable for all the client work I do, and I do use external recorders for 422, and once in my life I went to 444 on it just to see what it would do, and I had use of a 444 recorder. So if there's anyone that's not too hung up about the 420, 422 thing, it's me. Now I recognize the benefits, and the more the better, but at the same time 420 is very good.
Absolutely, and I mean the other thing is that this is a smaller camera than the FS7. The FS7 does some more stuff. It's a bigger camera and it's a slightly costlier camera. So for this package, we feel it's very, very convincing. What you're getting in the size, the ergonomics, the features, it's very, very strong.
And I have to say as well, okay, the FS7 isn't actually that much more, but we're talking two very different cameras. The size of that for me is a huge absolute draw card, not just because I want a smaller camera, even though it is nice not to have to carry around huge amounts of weight, but traveling, getting on and off of planes, and even just in the last few months, British Airways managed to change their whole regulations that you can only carry one main bag on and a very small one. They used to let you take two decent sized bags on, and that was good for me. Two F3s in the bag, or my lenses in the other. Well, suddenly I can't do that, and I always take two cameras anyway. The size of that, especially when you strip it down, you get three of those in the bag without too many problems at all.
Absolutely. So yeah, and this is what we've been hearing from people. People want more power in a smaller package. They want a consistent workflow, which is why we're still running XAVC in here. We're running that across the board now in basically all the products we're doing. And the list of format supporters, I think now numbers 73 other development partners in our alliance program for XAVC. So you won't really run into workflow problems anymore with it either.
Fantastic. Now, what's the general reaction? Are people concerned about the fact that it's, got not as much of a feature set as a FS7, certainly in terms of the record capabilities and how far you go in terms of megabits? Or are people happy with what you've produced there? What's the feedback you're getting?
The feedback we've had so far, and of course it's only been out for 36 hours or so, so it's still a very, very fresh camera. A huge amount of interest in it. It's been a very, very popular thing. I think as a companion to the FS7, as a B camera to that, I think it's going to be very popular like that. But there's a whole other part of the market that wants something this sort of size, this sort of simplicity, this sort of flexibility. They don't necessarily want something that they're going to put on their shoulder. They want a sort of handy, convenient package that they can, as you say, just drop in a bag and pull out and run with.
It's staggering. I mean, I seem to say this every year whenever new cameras come out, but when you look at where we have been and how quickly we've moved forward in terms of technology, it is mind-blowing. I mean, what's your opinion? You've seen a lot of technology changes. Are you staggered at where we've been able to go?
Well, the thing is that I know they're coming, but yeah, it's incredible. I mean, I've been working in this industry for around about 10 years now. Actually, no, this is my 10th IBC. I'm 32, I'm too young to have been to 10 IBCs. But it's incredible. I mean, back then we were looking at HD, people would have an HD monitor, that was amazing. Cameras, lots of SDI cables, external recorders and things like that. And now we're recording 4K onto consumer memory with 14 stops of dynamic range. Yeah, it's a bewildering pace we're developing at. But the nice thing about this is that it's got so much in it and the quality is so good that this is still a camera that can last you a long time. I mean, of course, we're always going to keep developing and keep going, and one of the challenges is to decide where you want to jump on and commit yourself to something. And this, of course, we talked about the 4K. The vast majority of productions are still HD and will be for quite some time, particularly for who we envisage are the main market for this type of camera. So that means that the 4K is actually something they can grow into.
Okay, I've got to ask you one other question now. The mount, it's an E-mount on there.
Yes,
I've never used the E-mount. I'd read about it, I know about it. What's the big advantage of the E-mount? What does it offer? And how strong is it? I worry about putting all my lenses on it. Obviously, if you put an E-mount made by Sony, they'll have made it in a certain way, the weight and everything, so that's going to work on their E-mount cameras. But if I take my Nikon lenses and my bigger lenses, 80-400, my 80-200, some of those are quite big and sizable. Is there the danger that the E-mount wouldn't be able to handle it, or is it a really strong mount?
The E-mount is a very robust mount. Now, it's a DSLR mount, so follow the same rules you would with any other kind of DSLR thing. Now, of course, if you're going to get some thumping great B4 long sort of sports documentary mount with a sort of, say, 10-inch element on the end of it, of course, I probably would want to put some rods under the camera in order to support that. So, but you won't find it substantially weaker than any other common DSLR mount system. So, no. Very few complaints we've had so far, and of course it's very established now. People have been using it on the FS700, on the FS7, and of course on all our DSLR ranges. So it's really very established and a fairly known quantity these days. But as regards to the main strengths of it, I think the main thing is the flexibility of it. Last time I heard, and that's probably changed by now, there are adapters to go from E-mount to up to 42, I think, different lens systems. So you want to go to EF, you want to go to B4, you want to go to PL, any of those options, there's something out there for you. And of course there's some exciting options that you can go to with things like the speed booster, for example. So you can get a stop back by reformatting from full frame down to Super 35. So there's a lot of very, very exciting options that you've got. The main point is that we want to be able to work with the lenses you've already got. We do a very full range of E-mount lenses, and you can read all about them on the website. We've got almost as many as anybody else does. I think we do 48 different E-mount lenses now. And there are other companies who are also producing for E-mount now. So the Samyangs and of this world are also doing native E-mount lenses because it's becoming a very popular system thanks to these, thanks to the A7Ss and A7Rs around the place. So, yeah.
Okay, next question. What about sensitivity? What's it rated at? What's the base sensitivity of the camera?
Base ISO on this camera is rated at 3200. It's the same sensor as you've got in the FS7, the F5 and the FS700, and they're all rated at 2000. But because we've got this new ND filtering system, because of course there's always various filters and optical low-pass filters and IR cutoff filters and things, essentially we've been able to make those clearer. So clear is now clearer than it was. So it's going to work very, very well in the dark.
I'm staggered. The F3, which I know well, that was 800 ASA base ISO. So we're talking 4 times more sensitive than a camera, the F3 from 5 years ago. that's like 4 stops. You know how much we pay for our lenses to get an extra stop, an extra 2 stops? That's a big deal.
Well, there are some substantial developments that have been going on in terms of CMOS sensor technology. Some really big leaps which are now making their way into the cameras. So in terms of a flexible tool, this is the one you're after. And particularly if you want to work with this with some of the broadcast lenses, for example, people working with B4 and stuff like that, we have adapters in for that. Many applications where that's useful for sort of crash zooms and things like that. That's great, but of course then you're using some glass in the adapter to spread a B4 2/3 inch signal over a Super 35 sensor. So you're going to lose a lot of sensitivity. So having that type of extra sensitivity in the sensor itself is a hugely valuable thing.
Is there anything more you want to tell us about the capabilities and what this camera offers?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few other points that I'd like to make about it. Of course, we've got 2 channels of audio in. We've got an XLR here and an XLR down here. Now, some people have been asking us why that is. And the thing is, if we put both of them on the handle, but you then want to put it in a gimbal or on a drone or something, then you'd lose both of them if you took the handle off. So we've left you with one down here so that you can still work that way. So I think that's quite a nice touch when you think about it.
Oh, it's great. Take off the handle and you've still got at least one XLR to get access to.
Absolutely. It's a fantastic little camera. Of course, you've got an SDI output there, you've got an HDMI output down there, headphones, all your connectors, an Ethernet port, so there's going to be some networking stuff that this camera can do, which we'll talk about later.
What about the RAW capability? It outputs RAW.
It will output RAW in the future. More details to follow.
I still have to ask for one more detail now. If you can tell me, with the FS7, if you want to do RAW, you need to buy the back, and that costs you more money, and then you've got the RAW output. Does this, when it's available, will be built into the camera, or is it something that's going to be added to it as a firmware or a hardware?
Still no comment on that, I'm afraid.
Well, that's fair enough. If you can't answer, you can't answer.
It might be worth mentioning, for those who want to dwell on it, that this does not have a D-sub connector like the FS7 does.
So it'd be really vague, but what is a D-sub connector?
The D-sub connector is the full interface that sits at the top on the back of the FS7 into which you connect the XDCA FS7 output box.
Okay.
This doesn't have one of those.
So that would indicate that it may well be firmware?
That would be pure speculation on your part.
Okay, well we can hope. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to strip the camera down so we can get a good look at just how portable and manageable this camera is. Tom, just tell us again, how much does it weigh? Was it like 800 grams or
800 grams for the body on its own.
That's not a lot for a camera. I mean, usually you'd be talking a real compromise of the camera that gets that light, and this
Absolutely.
camera doesn't seem like much of a compromise to me.
This is a camera totally stripped down. So 800 grams and it's absolutely tiny.
I can't help but take this in my hands now that it's totally stripped down. And that is really a serious piece of equipment, given that it's so small and so capable. I mean, I'd already said it in this interview, I'm a big fan of the Sony F3. I obviously haven't updated my cameras in a few years, but that's because the F3 has been so good. But we've got a camera here that's a lot more capable than the Sony F3 ever was. And full 422 10-bit recording at HD, 4K at 100 megabits a second, nice and small, 240 frames a second if you choose to record high speed for 7 seconds. 7 seconds at that sort of frame rate is actually quite a long time. I'm staggered. I'm totally staggered at what we've got here. I could have 3 of those lined up in a bag and look like a tourist with a very small pack on my back, and no one would ever think anything. Well, next time I'm buying, I'll be looking at one of these. Of course, there's other options I'll be looking at. There's so many options out there, but this one is really appealing. Tom, thank you. It's been a fantastic interview.
Thank you.
Cheers.